Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our virtual meeting with some of our animals. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Rachel, and I work with the education team at the Natural History Museum. As you can probably tell, I'm not at home right now, or I'm not at the museum right now. I'm at home like many of you, but we do have some amazing staff that still need to go into the museum to help take care of our living animals that call the museum home. You might be surprised to learn that the museum even has live animals, but we do have over 100 different species of living animals that are in places like our nature lab, the new Bugtopia exhibit in the Discovery Center, and some that live behind the scenes, which you're actually going to get to see today. I'm joined today by some of our live animal program team, and along with our animal ambassadors, they're here to help connect your hearts and minds to science that's done at the Natural History Museum. Forrest Urban, who you'll be hearing from in a moment, is our manager of invertebrate living collections at the museum, and he has a few special friends to share with you today. We also have a helper from our education department, Jessica, who will be assisting behind the scenes. Thanks so much. We'll be together for about 30 minutes and get to meet a few of our amazing animals. After Forrest is done sharing, we're going to answer some of your questions about the animals that we've seen. Today, in particular, we're going to be exploring some of the science of slime during our program in partnership with Nickelodeon. We'll learn about some of the clever ways that some invertebrates, or animals without a backbone, like insects, use their slime to survive. Pretty cool. Now, this might be a different format of Zoom than some of our students watching today are used to. You won't see any of your classmates, your teacher, or any of the other people watching this program, and we can't see or hear you. You'll only be able to see and hear us today. So since we can't actually see one another, I do want to take a moment to make a special shout out to all the students joining us from today's schools. Thanks for being here. And I'm actually curious, has anyone been to these programs before? I'm going to launch a quick poll and just see if folks have met some of our live animals in a virtual presentation before. I'll give a few moments for students to respond. I have seen some familiar schools on today's list. It's so fun having some friends returning for another program. I'll give folks a few more seconds to answer our poll. Have you met some of our live animals before? Yes, no, or I don't remember. Thanks, friends. Wow, I see a lot of folks, about 50% of you have met some of our live animals before. That's awesome. And for our new friends, welcome. We're so glad to have you. We're gonna meet some really cool animals today. So since we can't see any of you and you can only see us right now, we're going to use the chat function to ask questions. So during Forrest's presentation, if you're watching this on Zoom, you can click on the chat box to type in a question or ask your adult to help type in a question for you that we'll try to answer at the end of the presentation. Your chat box might look a little different depending on what device you're using. If you're on a tablet like an iPad, your chat button will be in the upper right-hand corner. If you're on a computer or a laptop like a Chromebook or on your phone, your chat button will be on the bottom in the middle. Type your question directly into the chat for us to see it, and your question will only be seen by the museum staff who are running this Zoom right now. The chat box is currently closed, but we will open it up during Forrest's presentation. We ask that all of our friends joining us today only put questions or comments related to the presentation in the chat. This helps us make sure we can get through as many questions as possible. And to be respectful of our helpers and our presenters, we should also make sure we are communicating respectfully and using appropriate language in the chat. Folks that are not following our code of conduct today may be asked to leave the program. We'll try to get to as many questions as we can, but in case we don't get to answer your question today, I encourage you to record your ideas and you can learn more about the animals we're meeting today on your own. So if you'd like, use this opportunity to grab a piece of paper and a pencil so you can record your experience while you're watching today. You can note down any of those questions you have, maybe a few facts that you've learned, or draw or write a description of what the animals look like. So let's get started. I'm going to introduce our guest Forrest today, and he's going to show us a little bit about some of the live animals we're going to meet. Hey, Forrest.
Hey, Rachel. So today we're talking about slime, as you mentioned, which is awesome, but we don't usually think of bugs as being particularly slimy. Mostly they keep their slime on the inside of their body, kind of like we do, and the outside pretty clean. Bugs are super clean, actually. But there are a few that do use slime, and it's usually during one specific part of their life cycle. not all the time. So it's for a very specific purpose. And I have about three or four things that we're going to look at today. The first thing that we're going to look at, or maybe you've seen these outside, they're super weird. You'll be walking in a field or maybe in your yard, and it looks like somebody's spit like a loogie on a plant. But this is actually a type of bug called a spittle bug. And this is something that they extrude from their body to create this protective covering. And they're just little teeny tiny guys. This is a nymph of something that we'll look at in a minute. Keep that as a surprise for what it turns into. And so what they do is they drink the sap from the plants. That's the inside fluids. And they drink so much of it. Actually, they have to drink so much of it because there's not a lot of nutrition in the sap of the plant. So they drink so much of it that they end up urinating or peeing it out and creating a huge foam, a huge spit labyrinth, if you will. But they use the spit as protection for themselves. And so they'll create all of these bubbles, and then use their tail end as kind of like a snorkel to break through the surface, and like when you go scuba diving in the water, and take a breath. But eventually what they'll do is they'll pop all of the little tiny bubbles around them to create a big empty bubble in the center of all the spit and the foam, and use that as a protective space that has air inside of it. And that's where they go through the rest of their development, their metamorphosis. And so this is the nymph stage that's going to eventually grow wings, change its body completely, kind of like a butterfly goes through metamorphosis. So it has a pupa. It pupates inside that bubble and turns into what's called a frog hopper. Now, frog hoppers are super cool. They have incredible hopping and leaping abilities, right? We've looked at jumping spiders before. We know what great jumping spiders are, right? We learned that jumping spiders, especially this daring jumper, can jump about 50 times its body length. Well, a frog hopper can jump 100 times its body length. They can jump super, super far. It's incredible. But a jumping spider is a predator, right? Now, a frog hopper is not a predator. They don't eat other animals. They suck the juices from plants. So they're kind of considered a plant pest by us. But some frog hoppers mimic jumping spiders. And so this is a jumping spider mimic. So that's a type of frog hopper that looks just like a jumping spider. Can you see the similarities? Super cool. Some other things that use slime-like substances and part of their life cycles are vinegaroons. We looked at vinegaroons at a previous episode, and we're going to look at some up close and personal when we get to our critter cam. But they only use slime during the reproductive phase as well. So the female has all of these eggs, and the eggs are big, and there's a lot of them. There's about 30 eggs. They're about the weight of a bowling ball, really heavy. And she'll extrude all the eggs from the inside of her body, wrap them up in slime in order to keep them protected and suspended and moist, and then carry this ball attached to the bottom of her abdomen around for about 2 months, for a long time, protecting them, keeping them moist in this protective slime ball, until eventually they will eat their way out of the egg and crawl up on top of her body. And they have a suction cup mouth. They'll suction cup to her body. All of them, all 30 of them do this for another couple of months, going through their development little by little until they take their first molt. And then once they take their first molt, they'll climb up off of her body, and they're solitary creatures. So they'll go and find their own solitary lair. But when they first take their first molt, they have bright red pinchers. Those are called chelicera and antenna, and they're super cute. Now, these are an ancient arachnid super old, over 350 million years old. And they really look archaic. They really look ancient. 100 million years before the dinosaurs. There's not that many species of them, but the largest species in the world is found right here in North America. We have them in our deserts in like Arizona and New Mexico. So we'll look at those. That's super cool. And then another thing that you may not realize has a slimy component to their life cycle are praying mantids. And so all praying mantids start out in a slime ball, essentially. So this is an orchid mantid, beautiful type of mantid that mimics an orchid, right? They're predators, so they'll sit down inside of a flowering plant and wait for pollinators to come and pollinate it and then reach out and grab them as they're mimicking lifestyle. But everybody, if you're a mantid, starts out in this egg sac foam mass. And so we're going to look at a short video clip of praying mantis laying the foam mass. So all the eggs are in the center of this gigantic foam bundle. But eventually the foam will harden and become harder, but it's still a protective place that's got the moisture and everything locked into it so that they don't dry out. And eventually, after a period of time, usually it's about 6 months during the springtime when the summer gets warmer, when the weather gets warmer, they'll emerge individually, one at a time, through the egg mass. And so that's an emerging mantid. Doesn't even look like a mantid at all. It's got its body all streamlined, legs and antenna, everything tucked in so it can slide its way out through a thin filament of silk. They all do it at the same time until eventually they're all suspended on the silk and they can pop open their legs, boing out their antenna, get their head out, and eventually, because they're also predators, they all move away to their own area, or else they'll eat each other. And so this is a type of mantid that some people call a kung fu mantid. And I have a funny picture of a kung fu mantid striking a pose in front of a jumping spider. Who will win? Who knows? Probably be an equal fight. So let's get to our creature cam now and look at some of the things that I have to show you today. I think the first thing that we're going to look at here is the praying mantis egg sac. So here's an egg sac here that's already emerged. Everybody's already hatched out of it. And so I dissected it in half so that we could see what it looks like on the inside. So there you can see, this is all the individual cells. Each one of those had an egg, and each egg had a mantid inside of it. Super cool, right? And then we can look at some of these mantids that are brand new. They've only been alive for, I think about a month now. Let's see one of them that will not jump away from the camera for us. Autofocus it. And so this is the deadleaf mantis here from Southeast Asia in her habitat. She's only had one molt, and we feed her fruit flies, and we have about 50 siblings of hers. Super cool, right? We get the lid on. I can tell she's about to take off. There we go. Easy does it. All right, we got her in there. And then while I have the webcam down here, I just wanted to show you really quickly. This is something that mimics slime. So this is the giant swallowtail caterpillar. You can see that imitates looking like slime, because who wants to eat slime? And so by slime, I mean bird poop, right? We would consider bird poop very slimy. And you can see the head and the legs. Super cool, right? All right, so let me come back to my other camera here. The lid on this. And let's look at the mother of that praying mantis. She is a doozy, and she's put out another egg sac. Let's look at her. Here she is. You see her right here? There she is right there, right? She's a dead leaf mantis. And so She's trying to blend into this dead tree branch. And this is her egg sac down here. Now, I can pick it up and show it to you. There's no problem. I'm not going to hurt it at all. Very foamy. Looks like a leathery purse. And inside each little compartment is an individual mantis egg. And so depending upon the species, they can make between 100 to 500 new mantids with each egg sac. Then I just wanted to show you the vinegaroon that we looked at in the video in case you don't remember seeing a vinegaroon before. Now they're big, but they're incredibly gentle and practically blind and not very defensive, except they do shoot acid, right? Acetic acid, which is vinegar, which isn't very harmful to people. It's a weak acid that we actually eat through this tail right here. But if she were to be gravid, that means she had eggs inside of her body that she wanted to lay. She would extrude them from her abdomen and then carry them around and protect them for about 2 months. Super cool, right? So you can see her long legs here. These are feelers. She can't really see very well. She's practically blind, but they're very gentle, but pretty big creatures. Also predators. Well, Rachel, that's all that I have for the show and tell. I'm happy to answer any questions anybody might have.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Forrest. We met so many cool invertebrates today. I'm going to kind of go in order of the animals you showed us with our questions, and we'll jump right into it. So Maram was wondering about the spittlebug insect. Where can you find these types of insects? You said we might even be able to see them around our neighborhoods.
I don't know if I've seen any in greater LA, but if you go to an area that's more meadow-like, less urban, you'll definitely see them. And so they're usually if you see one, you'll see a whole bunch of them in an area, usually in the crux of a plant. Right in that crux is where there's that mass of spittle. And then you can easily like push away the spittle and see the little teeny tiny creature in there. They're pretty tiny, about, like that big. They're pretty tiny, but they're super cute. They're like, have these huge, usually big red eyes. And then you can watch it make its spittle house.
That's so cool. We had some questions also about the vinegaroons. Jimena was curious, would it bother the mother to be carrying the egg sac for so long?
You think it would, because the eggs themselves, like I said, are pretty heavy, and she has like 30 of them. But they evolved 350 million years ago, and they're still doing it. They don't do a lot of carrying actually when they have the egg sac. They've burrowed underground and created this underground cave-like area, and they won't eat during that time, so they're not actively out hunting trying to get food. They're just kind of sequestered down with their egg mass, so they can go a long time without food.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Miss Navarro's class was curious about the diet of the vinegaroons. You mentioned they're predators. What do they eat?
Well, anything that they can catch for the most part. So they'll eat each other. They'll definitely eat, scorpions, crickets, roaches, spiders. So other invertebrates, I would say. I don't think they would be fast enough to catch maybe a little salamander, but you saw their pinchers, though they don't try to pinch people, but they have really, really strong front pinchers. They can hold things down really, really tightly and immobilize them.
That's a neat adaptation. A couple questions about our mantids, our praying mantis. So Anita was curious, can mantids be different colors?
Oh, absolutely. There's so many different types of mantids. Just in California, I can think of three. And the color can vary as well. They can camouflage a little bit and change their color depending upon what they are on. So a green mantid, when it moves to something that's more brown, can turn brownish, and then it can turn back to green if it moves back to something that's more green. The orchid mantid color can also vary if the orchid coloration is variable. So there's so many different types of mantids and great diversity of coloration and form. During our bug fair, we sell lots of exotic mantids. So maybe we'll be up and running next summer, so you can come and check that out, see them for yourself. They make really good pets as well. So
Very cool. Elizabeth was wondering, how long does it take for a mantid to be fully grown?
it depends upon the species, but usually about a year. They'll go through their complete life cycle and be a full grown adult in about a year.
Cool. We had a related question. Lillian was curious, how old was the dead leaf mantid that you showed us?
This one is going on about 7 months old. And this is the grown female of these little guys. So this one is only, maybe a month old.
So cool. We also had some questions from students about the name of this animal. Why is it called the dead leaf mantid?
Well, it looks so much like a dead leaf. We set it up in Bugtopia with a bunch of dead branches and dead leaves. And I mean, you really have to put your nature eyes on to be able to see it. It's so camouflaged in. And so if I could get this one closer, we'd be able to see there are like parts of its exoskeleton that look like dead leaves. So there's like veins in its exoskeleton that are built in, dead parts of the leaf. It's really incredible camouflage. Even the legs look like parts of a dead leaf, and parts of a dead branch. Yeah.
So neat. Harper was wondering, how do they stay on the edge of the glass? How are they kind of holding on and sticking to the different things that they're hanging on to?
I'm not sure we're talking about, but all invertebrates have claws, really incredible, intricate claws, tips on the ends of their legs that help them to adhere to almost any type of surface, in addition to suction cups as well. So usually they'll have the sharp points at the tip and then suction cups back here to help them to adhere to most surfaces.
Very cool. Xavier was wondering, how do you find all these cool creatures?
Well, for example, the vinegaroon, we can go out into New Mexico or Arizona, and we know how to look for them in the desert. We grow the swallowtails in our pavilion, and the orchid mantid, we have a grower in Malaysia that grows these for us, and they'll send us a male and a female, and we'll mate the male and female and then rear our own. So it depends on what it is.
Totally. Very cool. Miss Navarro's class has another question for you. Do you ever get scared touching or handling the insects that you've shown us?
Well, first I try to learn as much about them as I possibly can, so I know how to handle them, or if I should handle them at all. I actually don't handle most things. We have a huge collection, and I only handle a small portion of it because it's just better for the animal that I don't. It can cause a lot of anxiety. Animals can stop eating, stress for an animal if you touch them. But I definitely have a healthy fear, if you will, learning as much about them as I can. And mostly my fear is for them, not so much for me, because I don't want to hurt them or stress them out in any way.
That makes sense. We had a couple of other questions about the vinegaroons. Brooke was curious, does the vinegaroon like to be in wet places, or are they like a scorpion, for example, and live in dry places like the desert?
Well, they usually are found, their range is in a dry place, but they usually try to go underground where it's actually more moist and damp underneath there, because there's usually some plants, those plants absorb water, that water collects underground in mud and sand. And then they'll, when they dig underground, they pack all that wet dirt to create walls of a layer to keep it moist. So they are usually found in arid places, but just because a place is wet doesn't mean there isn't any moisture or water. Animals and plants know how to find it and collect it and store it and use it.
Awesome. Oscar was wondering, do we get vinegar from vinegaroons?
We do not. As far as I know, there aren't any cultures that get vinegar from vinegaroons. We know how to make it pretty easily ourselves using things like lemons and materials that we use to make our own vinegar.
That makes sense. Are vinegaroons known by any other names?
Yes, they are. What are the other names of vinegaroons? Whip scorpion is another name. Solupigid is another name. But usually whip scorpion or vinegaroon are the two most common.
Very cool. Daniela was curious, how many mantids do we have at the museum in the insectary or in our exhibits?
Yeah, right now I have a lot. I would say probably at least 50, probably more, and more on the way because I have so many egg sacs.
That's awesome.
But the reason why they have such a high reproductive rate is they just don't all make it. They have to go through so many molts in order to become an adult, usually about 10 molts. And the molting process is really problematic. And they have to, if they don't get enough to eat, then they can't molt as many times as they need to. So they're also prey for other predators, so there's lots of things that can happen to them.
Totally.
Yeah.
That makes me think of a related question. Alondra was wondering, why does, specifically she was asking about the dead leaf mantis, why does she have camouflage?
To be super creepy. And so it's funny is they camouflage in on leaves. They don't try to look like living leaves because they don't necessarily want to attract herbivores and have to fight off of herbivores to eat them. So they usually are cryptic on dead leaves specifically, and still are amongst herbivores eating them. They don't want them to in turn eat her. And so it's just to be more stealthy. They don't usually move very quickly, and so they creep along, and they don't want to blow their cover by looking like something that's alive.
That makes sense. All right, I maybe have time for one more question. Mr. Aravello's kindergartners at Rockdale VAPA want to know if you've ever been bitten or stung by any insects in your time handling all these lovely guys.
I have. I have. I think the thing that's probably the most memorable is a sting that I got from a velvet ant. So I was showing off, I'll have to say, trying to show one of our coworkers, keeper Justine, how slippery they are. I was like, look how slippery they are. Look how slippery they are. They're just covered in velvet. I can't even possibly pick it up. Look, look, look. And then it got me. So it's happened. I'm also from Texas, and I've been stung on my foot a few times, wearing sandals out, in the sand or wherever.
Ouch.
Yeah.
Well, I love that you have a healthy fear and a knowledge of all those invertebrates that you're handling, but we're not too afraid of ones. They're often not, as you've
Right,
mentioned before, more
right,
scared of us, right?
right. I've learned to be more respectful, not so show offy.
Totally. Well, thank you so much, Forrest, and to the insects that joined us for today's presentation. Thank you to them as well.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Stay
I'm going
curious,
to
guys.
go ahead. Thanks, Forrest. I'm going to go ahead and close out our program for our students today. As we mentioned, there were a lot of great questions, so I encourage you all to write down those questions that you didn't get answered so you can do a little bit of your research on your own. We learned so much about some ways that insects use slime to survive, and we met so many cool animals like the vinegaroons, the mantids. Awesome. If you want to see more of our live animal program, you can give them a follow on Instagram at NHMLA_live animals. We'll also have all the videos from these presentations on our YouTube channel for you to watch later. So you can catch this recording and others at youtube.com/NHMLA. Thank you so much for joining us. We hope to see you again soon.